July 22nd, 1989. Peoria, Arizona. Rob Page, the husband of 32-year-old Pam Page, claims that she disappears from their home and leaves behind a letter revealing that she ran off with another woman and took $60,000 of their money. Rob does not report Pam missing to the police, and they soon discover that he typed up the letter himself and forged Pam's signature on it while constantly changing his story about what happened. While there is suspicion that Rob was responsible for Pam's disappearance, there is not enough evidence to charge him with anything, and no trace of Pam is ever found. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and this week we're going to be covering a missing persons case which was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, the 1989 disappearance of Pam Page. This is the story of a woman who ran a video store in Arizona and seemed to be happily married to her husband, Rob Page, until she vanished without a trace. Rob would provide a letter that he claimed Pam left behind, in which she informed him that she ran off with a woman named Sarah, but Pam's family did not believe she would have broken off all contact with them, and no conclusive evidence could be found to prove that Sarah even existed. Rob's account of what happened seemed to be filled with holes, and he frequently changed his story, so police eventually got him to admit that he forged Pam's signature on the aforementioned letter and lied about a number of details. Needless to say, there was good reason to be suspicious of Rob, but if you watch the Unsolved Mysteries segment about this case, which is available on the official FilmRise channel on Amazon Prime and YouTube, you'll see a text update which claims that the police no longer consider Rob to be a suspect. However, I need to give a shout out to my friend Heather Groutman, aka Crystal Dawn, as 6 years ago, she wrote an extensive article about this case at her website, lostandfoundblogs.com, and spoke with one of Pam's sisters, who confirmed that Rob had most definitely not been ruled out as a suspect, and shared some exclusive information which had never been made public before. Law enforcement is pretty certain that they know what happened here, but the main issue is that Pam has still never been found. Even if she never truly receives justice, her family would still like to recover her remains and bring her home, which is why we're going to explore this case on today's episode. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, and more. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word and garner us more exposure. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content, as our Patreon page has over 80 exclusive bonus episodes in our archives, which are not available on our regular feed. So with all that out of the way, let us now explore the disappearance of Pam Page. Our story begins in 1989 in Peoria, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix which is located in both Maricopa and Yavapai counties, and our central figure is 32-year-old Pamela Jane Page, who goes by the name Pam. Pam was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and was the youngest of 8 children to parents Mary and Willie Frisbee Sr. The Frisbees considered themselves to be a very tight-knit family, and a big turning point for Pam occurred after her brother, William Frisbee Jr., got married to a woman named Patina Page. In 1977, Bettina's brother, Robert Page, who went by the name Rob, was on leave from the Navy, but Bettina helped introduce him to Pam and they immediately hit it off. In fact, they hit it off so well that Rob proposed to Pam only 2 or 3 weeks after they met, and she said yes. After the couple got married a short time later, Rob's career in the Navy required them to move around a lot and live in various locations over the next 6 years, but in 1983, they decided to settle down in Peoria, and at this particular point, they live in a house on West Shangri-La Road alongside a pair of miniature dachshund dogs named Rerun and Killer. While Rob works as a supervisor at the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, Pam owns a video rental store called Fast Forward Video, which is located at the corner of Peoria Avenue and 67th Avenue in Glendale. In 1987, the couple experienced some serious friction in their marriage and discussed getting a divorce, which would involve selling off Fast Forward Video and giving Pam the proceeds, while Rob kept their house and their boat. But the plan fell through when they were unable to find anyone who would pay cash to purchase the store. One of the biggest sources of conflict was when Pam experienced a pregnancy scare, as Rob did not want to have children. Pam considered moving back to Arkansas, but when it turned out that she was not pregnant after all, Rob changed his mind about the divorce, and they managed to have a reconciliation. On July the 7th, 1989, Pam went back to Fort Smith to spend time with her family, and she told everyone that everything was going well with Rob and they were happy together, as she said they were planning to buy a new house and possibly open up a second video rental store. Pam left Arkansas on July the 16th and returned to work at Fast Forward Video, and her employees said that she appeared to be in good spirits. At around 8:30 p.m. on the evening of Friday, July the 21st, Pam closed the store and walked out to the parking lot with her assistant manager before they went their separate ways, but this would turn out to be the last confirmed independent eyewitness sighting of Pam from anyone besides her husband. 5 days later, on July the 26th, Rob received a phone call at his residence from Pam's older sister, Trina Smith, who asked how Pam was doing, but was surprised to hear Rob say that Pam was gone. Rob's story was that after Pam returned home from work on the evening of July the 21st, they went to sleep together, but when Rob woke up sometime during the early morning hours of Saturday, July the 22nd, he noticed that Pam was no longer in bed. When Rob headed downstairs, he saw Pam sitting on the couch, crying and looking through some family photographs, but she told Rob that her back was hurting. Rob said he encouraged Pam to see a doctor about it, and she told him she would spend the rest of the night on the couch. Rob then went back to bed, and when he woke up again and went downstairs sometime between 7 and 8 a.m., he saw Pam sorting through her clothes. She told Rob that she was not feeling well, so he agreed to open the video store for her and encouraged her to stay home. Rob then drove to the store and spent the day working, but when he returned home, he was surprised to discover that the house was now in complete disarray, as Pam was not there, but she had left a 2-page typewritten letter behind. Here is a word-for-word transcript of the full letter. Quote, "Rob, I was going to write this, but every time my hand started shaking. You may have already figured out what is happening. Sarah said I shouldn't write you a letter, but you deserve an explanation. By the time you read this, I will be a long way from here. Right now, I'm not even sure where we are going to go. I'm not coming back either. I have thought this thing out and have been planning this for several months. I thought I would go back home, but it just isn't right. I know this now since my trip. I'm leaving because I'm not happy, and I know you aren't either. I thought living back home would make me happy. It won't. I know this now. I guess I really don't know what will make me happy, but I have to find it. I do know that we are not happy together, and we haven't been in so long I really can't remember anymore. You have changed so much over the years, and each year we just keep getting farther apart. We don't love each other, and I'm not sure if we ever really did. I'm not sure what real love is, but it has to be better than this. We are only existing together, and it is making me crazy. I really care about you, but I have to start doing something for me. I'm tired of trying to please everyone in this world except myself. I'm tired of being nice to you, the girls, the members, my family, your family, and everyone else, and getting nothing in return. The only one who can find happiness for me is myself. The only real friend I feel like I have is Sarah. She understands my feelings and has really helped me to face the realities of life. She has done what I am doing. Sarah and I are both looking for the same thing, happiness. She hasn't found it here, and neither have I. I'm not sure where we are going yet, but I guess it really doesn't make much difference. Sarah and I have gotten really close to each other over the months, and I don't think I could do this without her being there. I'm taking Rerun with me. He always did love me the best. Killer was always your favorite, and I know he would miss you if I took him also. I know they will miss each other. Be good to Killer, because I'm really going to miss him a lot. I'm leaving this way because I don't think I could tell you these things face to face. I know you thought we were going to get a divorce. I just don't think I could go through all that. It would drive me insane to play 20 questions with everyone about it, and everyone would be trying to put us back together when we both know it wasn't meant to be. I'm taking the Horde. A second store was never meant to be. I'm leaving you enough money in the accounts to keep you in the green. I'm going to take the car, but only to meet Sarah. I will leave the keys behind the driver's seat and look. It will be at one of the Winchell's donut shops in town. I just don't want you to try and find me. Please don't try. I'll just leave. I'll leave the other keys, the checkbook, and all my credit cards on the table with this letter. I'm not sure if I could ever go back home again after doing this, but try to explain what I'm doing. I love my family, but they just wouldn't understand what I'm trying to do. I do feel good about what I'm doing. I know inside that this is the right thing for both of us. I know you will do okay with the store. You might want to make 2 of the girls managers. I know that is what you have always wanted. You should get an accountant too. Try not to get too carried away with your ideas and everything will work out. You always have to have the last word. This is the one time when I will beat you to it. Please try to understand why it must be this way. I really don't want to hurt you, but I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want you to hate me. I'm going to take the pictures. You never look at them anyway. Please don't worry about us. We will be all right. Between Sarah and me, we will have plenty of money to take care of ourselves. Promise you will eat right. You are always bad about that when I have been gone. You can't live on cereal and pizza all your life. You can tell the members whatever you want to make it easiest on you and the girls. I have always thought you were going out on me, even though I don't know when you would have time to. If you are, I guess I don't really blame you, but I'm glad I never found out. I don't know exactly what I would have done. If you never have, I'm sorry I mistrusted you. I never went out on you. I always hoped that someday things would change with us. I know now that isn't possible. I'm sure there must be someone out there who is right for me and you because we sure aren't right for each other. Sarah is looking for the same thing, and together I think we will find it. Take care of Killer, Pam. End quote. Pam signed her first name at the bottom of the letter, and Rob told Trina that the reason he waited 4 days to inform her family about what happened was because he was embarrassed about the fact that his wife had left him for another woman. Rob claimed that he had never personally met the woman mentioned in the letter named Sarah, but he heard Pam talk about her as they had supposedly met at the video store after Sarah divorced her husband in California. As you might recall, the Pages owned a pair of miniature dachshunds named Rerun and Killer, who were both mentioned in the letter, and Rob confirmed that Rerun was also missing and Pam had left Killer behind. He also said that Pam had taken all of her family photographs and most of her clothing, and while her driver's license was missing, she left her credit cards and keys on the kitchen table. The quote-unquote hoard which Pam said she was taking in her letter was $60,000 in cash which she had saved up, and Rob claimed that she kept it inside a safe at Fast Forward Video because she distrusted banks. Following the discovery of the letter, Rob said that he went to the store and checked the safe and confirmed that the money was gone. During the letter, Pam wrote that she was going to leave her yellow Corvette at a Winchell's donut house, and after checking every Winchell shop in the area, Rob said that he found the Corvette parked out one the day after Pam took off. Rob also claimed that he attempted to file a missing persons report for Pam with the Peoria Police Department, but they would not take one since she had left voluntarily. Needless to say, Trina was left completely shocked by this news, as Pam had a very close relationship with her family, so it was hard to imagine her running away and breaking off all contact with them. Once the rest of Pam's relatives learned about what happened, they would each call Rob to ask what was going on, and he would read them the letter. Pam's father, Willie Frisbee Sr., asked Rob to fax him a copy of the letter, but when Willie looked at Pam's signature at the bottom, he became convinced that it did not belong to her. Willie had a number of personal items containing his daughter's signature, such as birthday cards and other letters, but he did not believe the signature on this letter matched her handwriting. Pam's family also had a hard time believing that she would have taken off with only one of her dogs, as she had raised Rerun and Killer since they were babies, and told her relatives that she would never separate them. Additional alarm bells started going off when the family contacted the Peoria Police Department, who informed them that they had never heard of the case, even though Rob claimed he had attempted to report Pam missing. Regardless, an official investigation was finally launched for Pam, and her family would travel from Arkansas to Arizona to assist in the search effort for her by posting and circulating missing persons flyers. On the surface, there did not appear to be any serious problems with the Page's marriage, as during her last visit with her family, Pam had told them that she and Rob were very happy together. The other employees from Fast Forward Video also confirmed that whenever Rob came into the store, he and Pam were always very affectionate towards each other, so they didn't notice any issues either. When Rob was formally questioned by investigators, he claimed that he last saw Pam when he left their house at around 8 a.m. on the morning of July the 22nd, but when he climbed into his truck, he noticed that it had ignition switch problems. Rob was able to drive into Glendale and was planning to open the video store, but he first decided to stop at several auto parts stores in order to purchase a part to replace the faulty ignition switch. However, none of these stores had the part that he needed, and his truck finally gave out in one of the store parking lots, which prevented him from starting it. Rob then said he went to a payphone and called his residence to tell Pam about what happened, but there was no answer. This made Rob assume that Pam had decided to leave and go open the video store after all, so he called a taxi to come pick him up and drive him home. Rob said that after he arrived, he didn't actually go into his house, and instead grabbed a replacement part for his ignition switch, which was kept inside his garage. He then used his bike to ride back to the auto parts store parking lot and was able to fix his truck's ignition switch on his own. After starting the truck, he later drove back home and found Pam's letter. Well, when investigators attempted to corroborate Rob's story, they discovered that it contained a number of troubling holes. For starters, when they questioned the employees from the auto parts store where Rob's truck supposedly broke down, none of them had any recollection of Rob or anyone else asking about a part for an ignition switch on that particular day. They also had no recollection of seeing Rob's truck, even though it was allegedly parked there for about 4 hours, and it was very distinctive looking, as it was painted blue with the logo for Fast Forward Video emblazoned on the side in bright yellow letters, and it also had orange flames on the hood. In addition, investigators found it odd that even though Rob claimed he drove around town looking for Pam's Corvette at every single Winchell's Donut House and did not find it until the day after she disappeared, it turned out the Corvette had actually been parked at a Winchell's located directly across the street from Fast Forward Video. But one part of Rob's story which did check out is that a taxi driver verified having picked him up in the area after he called for one on July the 22nd, and he was driven back home. Investigators decided to take a closer look at Pam's letter, but they were unable to turn up any information about the mysterious Sarah she supposedly ran off with, or verify that she actually existed. Even though Rob claimed that Pam originally met Sarah at Fast Forward Video, none of the other employees or regular customers knew who she was, and when police checked customer membership records, they failed to turn up anyone named Sarah who had a personal relationship with Pam. The Frisbee family remained convinced that the signature at the bottom of the letter did not belong to Pam, and after it was analyzed by the Arizona State Crime Lab, they reached the same conclusion. When Rob was questioned about this discrepancy by detectives, he continued to maintain that the letter was already signed when he found it, but he eventually changed his story and confessed that he had forged Pam's signature. Rob now claimed that he actually found a typed-up copy of the letter saved on a word processor on his home computer a few days before Pam disappeared, so he decided to confront her about it. Rob told him that she had originally typed out the letter after they got into a heated argument, but after she cooled down, she decided not to print it out, and assured Rob that she had no intention of leaving him. But of course, it was only a few days later, when Rob returned home, to discover that Pam had in fact left him, though in this version of his story, she had not actually printed out the goodbye letter. Instead, Rob decided to pull up the saved copy of the letter on the computer, added 4 sentences to it, and then decided to print it out before forging Pam's signature at the bottom. He claimed that Pam had left her Corvette behind at the house, but in order to match what she wrote on the letter, Rob drove it to Winchell's Donut House and abandoned it in the parking lot before going to a payphone across the street and using it to call a taxi in order to pick him up and drive him back home. Rob acknowledged that he fabricated parts of his original story, but only printed out the letter because he felt nobody would believe his story unless he took these steps, but he continued to maintain that Pam had left on her own accord. Regardless, Rob's inconsistencies only made investigators even more suspicious of him, and when they checked the word processor on his home computer, they came to the conclusion that the letter had been written all at once, rather than Rob adding 4 additional sentences a few days after the fact. Even though investigators asked Rob on multiple occasions if he would take a polygraph, he refused, and Pam's family alleged that whenever they posted missing persons flyers for her throughout the area, they would soon be taken down, and they suspected that Rob was responsible. Well, on August the 9th, just 2.5 weeks after Pam disappeared, Rob filed for divorce from her in Maricopa County Superior Court and posted notices in the newspaper in order to inform Pam about it in case she was out there somewhere. The divorce was made official 3.5 months later on November the 24th, but Pam's family would later learn that before she even went missing, Rob had contacted a divorce attorney to inquire about how one would get a divorce if their spouse was gone. In spite of this, Rob was given court approval to sell fast-forward video, which had run into financial trouble in Pam's absence, as roadwork and construction in the area had caused business to decline. Rob claimed that at one point, the police summoned him down to the station by informing him that they had found Pam's body. They also told Rob that they knew he had only killed Pam in self-defense, but he immediately sensed that they were lying and trying to coerce him into making a confession, so Rob called their bluff, and the police eventually admitted that Pam had not been found after all. For the next few years, the Frisbee family continued to make numerous trips from Arkansas to Arizona in order to search for Pam by handing out missing persons flyers and talking to everyone they could find. At one point, they thought they received a major break when Pam's Social Security card was used in Arkansas, but it turned out that a completely different woman named Pamela Jean Page had lost her own card, and when the state gave her a new one, they put Pam's Social Security number on it by mistake. The Frisbee family even met with this woman so that Pam's parents could personally confirm that she was not their missing daughter. Pam's story would receive national exposure when it was featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, which aired in December of 1993, but Rob declined to be interviewed as he feared that the show would be biased in favor of Pam's family and twist his words around. The Unsolved Mysteries segment did feature one of Pam's sisters, Jimmy Rice, consulting with Carol Pate, a psychic based out of Little Rock, Arkansas, who often worked with their police department, as Jimmy had read a newspaper article about Pate's assistance in another missing persons case and decided to get in touch with her. Pate claimed that she had never been to Arizona and knew nothing about Pam's background, but when she was given a photo of Pam, she said she started having visions of a man arguing with Pam inside the upstairs bedroom of her house before he knocked her to the floor and suffocated her with a pillow. According to those who heard Pate's account, the description she provided for this man matched Rob, and she also gave a very accurate description of Pam's house and bedroom. Pate claimed that she had visions of the man enlisting the help of a woman to put Pam's body in the trunk of a car and cover it with garbage bags before they drove away. She then said she saw them driving past a gray factory by some railroad tracks and had visions of the name Coolidge and the numbers 241. After turning on a dirt road and traveling about 5 miles, the man and woman carried Pam's body about 20 to 30 feet away from the road and headed down an incline before they dug a hole and buried her. Well, Jana Thorson, a newspaper reporter for the Peoria Times who provided a lot of coverage on Pam's story, decided to look into this information and discovered that there was a gray factory located by some railroad tracks in Peoria, which just happened to be near a sign featuring a phone number where the first 3 digits were 241. In addition, this area just happened to be on the route from the Page residence to the home of a longtime friend of Rob's who had served with them in the Navy and happened to live near a street named Coolidge. However, this did not lead to anyone pinpointing an exact location where Pam's body might have been buried. But the Frisbee family eventually learned about a man who owned a bookstore in Peoria and knew Rob personally. He claimed that around the time of Pam's disappearance, he had seen Rob, a woman, and a small child throwing a bunch of garbage bags into a dumpster located near a store. Since the local businesses had made an agreement not to use this dumpster to get rid of excess trash, the owner decided to go check it and discovered that these bags appeared to contain women's clothing. The owner soon had to leave town to deal with a family member's illness and did not learn about Pam's disappearance until sometime afterward, but while he did eventually come forward and share his story with police, the garbage bags which had been placed in the dumpster were long gone, so it was never verified if the women's clothing he saw might have belonged to Pam. Now, this information was not made public until decades after the fact, but at the time Pam went missing, Rob was supposedly having an affair with his secretary at the Palo Verde nuclear generating station, and this woman had a young son. In fact, while Pam was away visiting her family in Arkansas in the weeks prior to her disappearance, Rob apparently spent a good chunk of that time on his boat with the secretary and her son. Since Pam never mentioned anything about this affair to her family, it's unclear if she knew about it. It's also been reported that Rob did get remarried sometime after Pam went missing, though I'm not entirely sure if it was to the secretary or another woman, and he eventually wound up getting divorced. Anyway, Rob continued to remain living in the same house on West Shangri-La Road, but in 2009, he became seriously ill with liver and colon cancer. During this time period, he refused to allow Pam's family to see him, and while he was in hospice care, Rob's nephew apparently asked him to reveal what happened to Pam, but Rob refused to say anything and asked his nephew to leave the room. Rob wound up passing away on Christmas Eve at the age of 54. Sadly, Pam's father, Willie Frisbee Sr., also passed away in June of 2013 at the age of 87, while her mother, Mary Frisbee, died in November of 2020 at the age of 96, and both of their obituaries listed them as being preceded in death by their daughter Pam. Now, around the same time period when Rob died, the repackaged version of Unsolved Mysteries hosted by Dennis Farina was airing on Spike TV, and they wound up producing a repackaged version of their segment about this case. But oddly, it now concluded with a brief update in which Farina stated that the police no longer considered Rob to be a suspect in Pam's disappearance. Several years later, the segment would be re-released when Unsolved Mysteries dropped their original episodes onto their official FilmRise channel on Amazon Prime and YouTube, and if you watch the segment today, it concludes with a new text update which reads, quote, "Rob Page divorced his missing wife, and police claim he is no longer a suspect in her disappearance, but they still have no idea what happened to Pam Page," end quote. However, in September of 2019, an exclusive new article about this case was published at lostandfoundblogs.com titled "Pam Page, A Forged Farewell." Pam's sister Jimmy was interviewed and shared a lot of exclusive new information which had never been made public before, and confirmed that Rob had not been ruled out as a suspect. It turned out that in July of 2017, shortly after the 28-year anniversary of Pam's disappearance, her family received a formal letter from attorney Bob Schutz, the cold case supervisor at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, who revealed that a new investigation had recently been performed. Here is a word-for-word transcript of what he wrote, quote, "Dear Frisbee family, I have reviewed the summary of this case and the appended fact chronology, which includes the most recent witness statements. I have spoken with detectives Mark Stribling and Dennis Olson about the review of and follow-up on this case. If this matter was submitted to me today for consideration of charges, I believe we would have a reasonable likelihood of conviction, despite Pam's body never being found, of Robert Page on the charge of murder in the second degree. We really have no solid information to prove premeditation for a count of murder in the first degree. This case offers nothing in the way of alternative explanations of Pam Page's disappearance to warrant continuing working this case in efforts to find other suspects. In view of the fact that suspect Rob Page is now deceased, I consider this case closed. Sincerely, Bob Schutz, attorney, cold case supervisor," end quote. Even though there is no longer an active investigation, Pam's family are still hoping to recover her remains and learn the full circumstances of her disappearance and murder, but she continues to remain a missing person. So I guess you could say the trail went cold. So I have to acknowledge that this case is a bit different than usual for the trail went cold, as law enforcement officially considers it to be closed, and unless new information surfaces, they will no longer be performing any further investigation. They think it's pretty cut and dry that Rob Page was responsible for the murder of Pam Page, and now that he's deceased, there's really not much else they can do. However, that doesn't change the fact that Pam is technically still a missing person, and until her remains can be recovered, her family will always consider her disappearance to be unsolved. And I also think that there are definitely still some unanswered questions in this case, such as whether or not someone else could have helped Rob cover up the crime. If he did, and this individual is still alive, then they may be the only one who knows where Pam's body is buried. So obviously, my big introduction to this case was seeing it profiled on Unsolved Mysteries back in 1993, and it's no big secret that the show had a long track record of covering cold cases in which a wife went missing and their husband was under suspicion, but he still agreed to appear on camera and be interviewed in order to profess his innocence. And of course, more often than not, they came across very badly and only wound up digging a deeper hole for themselves, but Rob Page was one of the few spouses who seemed to be aware of this risk and declined to be interviewed. However, most Unsolved Mysteries fans still hold the opinion that Rob appears to be one of the guiltiest-looking husbands ever featured on the show. But I will say that what separated this case from many of their other stories about missing wives and suspicious husbands is that while a lot of those other relationships were in complete turmoil and appeared to be on the verge of ending before the victim went missing, there didn't seem to be any apparent motive for Rob to want Pam to disappear. Yes, the Pages went through some rough patches and came very close to divorcing in 1987, but they managed to reconcile, and in the weeks prior to her disappearance, Pam was telling her own family that she and Rob were quite happy and had plans for the future. However, it was not until I read the aforementioned Lost and Found blogs article when I learned that Rob was supposedly having an affair with his secretary at the time and had already consulted with an attorney about how divorce proceedings would be carried out if his spouse was gone. I used to wonder if this was a crime of passion in which Rob killed Pam in an unplanned fit of rage and had to cover up what he did, but there are definitely signs which point to premeditation. Now, one part of this story which many people do not know is that Pam had a first cousin who went missing 3 years before she did. The two cases are not believed to be connected, and I'll avoid sharing too many details since I might cover this case on a separate Trail Went Cold episode at some point, but Pam's cousin was 25-year-old Darla Harper, who vanished from her apartment in Little Rock, Arkansas on March the 4th, 1986. Long story short, Darla had gotten divorced from her ex-husband nearly 4 months earlier and was raising their 2-year-old daughter, but even though he became the prime suspect, and a search of his backyard actually turned up a tiny bone, they were unable to get DNA from it and determine if it belonged to Darla, so no charges have ever been filed, and Darla is still missing to this day. When Unsolved Mysteries agreed to cover Pam's case, her family inquired about whether they could produce a segment about Darla as well, but the show ultimately decided not to do so. Since Pam often spoke about what happened to Darla, Rob was definitely aware of it, so her family always wondered if this might have given him ideas, as perhaps he felt that if Pam disappeared and her body could not be found, there would never be enough evidence to prove that a crime took place and charge him with anything. Well, like I've already mentioned numerous times, there is a lot of conflicting information out there about whether or not Rob is still considered to be a suspect, but the letter that the Frisbee family received from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office in 2017 proves that he was never ruled out. Back in 1989, law enforcement was far more reluctant to charge suspects with murder without a body, but when the Maricopa County Attorney's Office decided to take a fresh look at this case decades later, it sounds like they may have uncovered new evidence which they felt would have been strong enough to charge Rob with second-degree murder and get a conviction if he had still been alive at that point. Even though I'm sure that letter must have been a bittersweet feeling for Pam's family, it's about as close to justice as they can hope to receive at this point, aside from being able to recover Pam's remains and give her a proper burial. Regardless, I still believe that there's a lot about this case which is worth analyzing. I also wanted to give a shout out to another true crime podcast called The Coroner's Report, as at the end of last year, they released a 4-part series of episodes about the disappearances of Darla Harper and Pam Page. Of course, since Pam's sister, Jimmy Rice, had agreed to be interviewed for the Lost and Found Blogs article, and was also interviewed on the Lost and Found Blogs podcast, she was also interviewed on The Coroner's Report, but perhaps the most interesting comments were provided by Rob Page's sister, Bettina. As you might recall, Bettina had been married to Pam's brother, Willie Frisbee Jr., and they helped introduce Pam and Rob to each other. Bettina was good friends with Pam before she even met Rob, but as you can imagine, the whole situation surrounding Pam's disappearance took a huge toll on Bettina and Willie Jr.'s marriage, and they wound up divorcing. In a lot of these cases where someone is under suspicion for their spouse's disappearance, it's not uncommon for their own family members to blindly defend them no matter what. But based on her interviews on the Coroner's Report, that's definitely not the case with Bettina, as she believes her brother was totally capable of harming Pam. Bettina claims that she did not have the nicest father, and he was particularly hard on Rob while they were growing up, which may have affected his personality. While Pam had told her own family that she was quite happy with Rob back in 1989, Bettina is actually more open and honest about the issues with their marriage, and said that Pam seemed to regret her decision to get engaged to Rob only a few weeks after they met. After they got married, Pam wound up gaining a lot of weight, as she's listed as being 200 pounds at the time of her disappearance, but Rob did not like this and would often pressure her to slim down. While Pam wanted to have a baby, Rob made it very clear that he never wanted children, and one of the factors which nearly led to the couple divorcing in 1987 is when Pam mistakenly believed she was pregnant. Even though Pam made it sound like she was quite happy with Rob around the time they went missing, I get the impression that she may have been exaggerating things in order to avoid worrying her family. And while we're on the subject of the Coroner's Report, it's also worth mentioning that it contains interviews from another noted figure that appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, and that's investigative journalist Don Devereaux, who is best known for his work on the Chuck Morgan and Doug Johnston cases, and is still alive today in his early 90s. Since Devereaux lived in Arizona, he also provided coverage on Pam's case at the time she went missing, and he has zero doubt that Rob is responsible for her disappearance. I mentioned earlier that psychic Carol Pate claimed that she had visions of a street named Coolidge, which appeared to be located near a residence belonging to a close friend of Rob's from their time in the Navy. According to Devereaux, this friend and his spouse were both out of town on vacation during the time period Pam went missing, and he has his own suspicions that Rob may have buried Pam on his friend's property under a storage shed that they were in the middle of constructing. While Devereaux said that police did perform a search of this property at some point, I do not believe they have ever performed a dig underneath the shed. But let's start at the very beginning and explore the circumstances of how Pam disappeared. The last independent eyewitness besides Rob who could confirm having seen Pam alive was her assistant manager at Fast Forward Video, who closed the store with Pam on the evening of July the 21st, 1989. Pam had just returned from seeing her family in Arkansas 5 days earlier, and by all accounts, she seemed to be in good spirits and nothing was out of the ordinary. So if you believe that Rob was responsible for Pam's disappearance, then something must have gone horribly wrong after Pam returned home that night. Rob's story is that Pam was suffering from back pain and not feeling well, so he offered to open up the video store for her the following morning, and he then shared all this nonsense about driving around town to get a part for a broken ignition switch on his truck, which I think we can all agree is completely fabricated. I've heard so many conflicting accounts that I'm not even 100% certain if Rob showed up at Fast Forward Video at any point that morning, though the write-up about this case at the Charlie Project says that he told the employees that he needed to run errands all day and then went to the store at around 4 p.m. to show them Pam's letter. The only part of Rob's story which could be corroborated is that he used a payphone to call a taxi to pick him up near the parking lot of Winchell's Donut House and drive him home, but that's likely because Rob planted Pam's Corvette there, even though he wouldn't actually quote-unquote discover it until the following day. Other than that, we seem to have a window of several hours in which Rob's whereabouts cannot be accounted for, and he was likely using that time period to cover up what he did. This probably explains why Rob came up with the entire saga of driving to all these stores to get a part for his ignition switch, as he needed a story to account for why he didn't show up to the video store that morning. The one part which has never made sense to me is that Rob claimed he found the part he needed to fix the switch from his own garage, so why would he need to drive around and stop by all these stores to begin with? Of course, in the letter Rob supposedly discovered that day, Pam revealed that she had run off with a woman named Sarah. Rob eventually admitted that he forged Pam's signature on it, though he maintained that Pam had already pre-typed the letter on her computer days earlier, and he merely added a couple of sentences before printing it out and signing it. Which is totally something that an innocent man who had no involvement in his wife's disappearance would do. Rob's explanation is that he felt no one would believe his story that Pam took off voluntarily unless he did this, but he said that when he discovered the letter days earlier, Pam told him that she only typed it out in the heat of the moment following a heated argument and had no intention of actually leaving him. But if Pam was lying and then decided to leave Rob for real, why wouldn't she have printed out the letter and signed it herself? I can just list off so many red flags with Rob's story, but the one detail which could have conceivably supported it was the fact that Pam supposedly took $60,000 in cash which had been kept inside the safe at Fast Forward Video. If the authorities had been able to verify that this $60,000 actually existed, then that would have looked favorable towards Rob, as I'm not sure a man who wants to murder his wife would go so far as to make that much money disappear in order to fabricate a cover story. Following Pam's disappearance, Rob actually hired the services of a private investigator named Ronald Babbage to search for her. During some of the contemporary media coverage of this case, Babbage told the press that Pam was a woman who worked long hours and seemed to have no friends, and Rob even said that Pam never had more than one friend at a time, stating, quote, "It was one friend, it was always singular," end quote. After Pam went missing, Fast Forward Video ran into financial problems, and Rob was forced to sell it at a loss, and Babbage actually used this point to publicly defend Rob, stating that if Pam hadn't taken the $60,000, Rob could have used the money to keep the store going and sell it at a profit. But once again, that's dependent on whether the $60,000 actually existed in the first place. It's also worth noting that when Jimmy Rice was interviewed for the Lost and Found blogs article years later, she revealed that Babbage contacted her family and the police to express his opinion that Rob was involved in Pam's disappearance. Of course, the Frisbee family was always skeptical that Pam had $60,000 in cash just lying around, as they said that she and Rob were not known for saving money and would always spend whatever they made. And while I don't know how accurate this reenactment was, I always found it amusing that the Unsolved Mysteries segment presented a scene where an actor portraying Rob goes into the video store and walks over to a safe located on the sales floor next to the shelves, where he checks inside and discovers the money is missing. If Pam's safe was actually located out in the open where customers could see it, I seriously doubt she would be keeping $60,000 in there. So yeah, I think this was a detail that Rob completely fabricated in order to enhance his story. So another potentially disturbing detail about this story is that Rob owned a pair of dachshunds named Rerun and Killer, yet Rerun happened to go missing with her and has also never been found. Pam's family believed that she never would have split up the dogs, so did Rob actually go to the trouble of harming Rerun as part of his cover story? I know it's always been a trope that true crime followers can often become a lot more sensitive about animals being harmed than people, so if Rob killed Rerun, that would probably propel him into the upper echelon of all-time worst murder suspects for many people. I suppose the best case scenario is that Rob took Rerun out into the wild somewhere and let him run free, but since these dogs were described as being inseparable, I'm not sure why Rob thought it would be believable to make it look like Pam voluntarily took off with only one of the dogs and left the other behind. I suppose another horrifying possibility is that Rerun could have tried to intervene in order to save her before he was killed, so Rob had to get rid of the dog's body as well. But since a lot of Pam's personal items, including her clothing and family photographs, also disappeared alongside her, that really shows signs of premeditation and Rob going out of his way to make it look like Pam left him and ran off on her own. Now, to play devil's advocate, I still want to explore the possibility that Pam disappeared voluntarily, as this sort of thing is not completely unprecedented, but given that she hailed from a close, tight-knit family and had 7 siblings, it does not seem believable that Pam wouldn't have attempted to contact someone if she was still alive. Rob never attempted to report Pam missing, and even went so far as to lie to her family about it, but said that he only did all these suspicious things because he was embarrassed and did not want to admit that his wife left him for another woman. Fair enough, but it's now been 36 years, and it does not sound like investigators have ever turned up one shred of evidence that this mysterious Sarah actually existed. Rob admitted that even though Pam had told him about Sarah, he never actually met her, but Pam's friends, family members, and coworkers have always maintained that they never knew of anyone in Pam's personal life by that name, and she never even mentioned her. On one hand, Rob filed for divorce from Pam only 3 weeks after she disappeared, which might look extremely suspicious on the surface. But on the other hand, if he legitimately believed that his wife dumped him for someone else and ran away, it's far less suspicious to file for divorce under those circumstances rather than if you have no idea what happened to your spouse. However, since it turned out that Rob consulted with an attorney before Pam disappeared and inquired about how a divorce would take place in his spouse's absentia, that looks incredibly damning. Now, when this case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1993, they spent the last portion focusing on the interactions between Jimmy and psychic Carol Pate, which I suppose is not all that surprising, given that the show and the media in general seemed to spend a lot of time focusing on the role of psychics in cold case investigations during that time period. We can now roll our eyes at the whole thing all these years later, but during their interviews on the Coroner's Report podcast, Jimmy, Bettina, and even Don Devereaux all acknowledged how impressed they were about how accurately Pate described the interior of Pam's house and her bedroom during her visions, even though she had never been there before or saw any photographs. She also provided a couple of accurate details about the section of Peoria where the Pages lived, including the fact that an old friend of Rob's from the Navy happened to live near Coolidge Street, and Rob would have needed to pass by a great factory next to some railroad tracks if he drove from his own house to his friend's place. While Pate said that she had visions of Rob burying Pam near a remote dirt road, Devereaux expressed his belief that Rob may have buried her beneath a storage shed on his friend's property since he was out of town at the time. Whatever the case, it does not sound like law enforcement considered these so-called visions to be strong enough leads to perform an extensive search of the area or a dig on this man's property. The main reason I mentioned this whole psychic angle is because Pate claimed that Rob enlisted the help of a female accomplice in order to dispose of Pam's body, but I always found it odd that the Unsolved Mystery segment never even attempted to address who this woman could have been. After all, now that Rob is deceased, she could potentially be the only person out there who knows the location of Pam's remains. But it was not until I read the Lost and Found blogs article 6 years ago when I learned that Rob had supposedly been carrying on an extramarital affair with his secretary and spent a lot of time with her and her young son while Pam was away visiting her family in Arkansas. This account is particularly interesting when you learn that a local bookstore owner allegedly saw Rob, a woman, and a small child dumping some trash bags filled with women's clothing into a dumpster around the time of Pam's disappearance, but since this man did not come forward until well after the fact, there was no corroborating evidence to support his story, and it was technically nothing more than hearsay. However, we know that most of Pam's clothing disappeared alongside her, so if this bookstore owner's account is true, then this implies that Rob got rid of the clothing in order to fabricate his cover story. And if the woman and the child seen with him were the secretary and her son, then this would mean that she was complicit in the cover-up and knew what happened to Pam, though I do find it odd that she would bring her son along while disposing of evidence from a murder. Even if this vision of Rob burying Pam's body is false, we know that Rob owned a boat at that time and apparently went out on the water in it with the secretary and her son, so this can provide another potential explanation for how he disposed of Pam. It's worth mentioning that Rob did get remarried at some point after Pam went missing, and while this second marriage eventually ended in divorce, I'm not entirely sure if he married the secretary or an entirely different woman. All I know is that Rob's second wife refused to speak with Pam's side of the family, and the host of the coroner's report said that when they attempted to contact Rob's ex-wife and one of his ex-girlfriends to see if they would be willing to be interviewed, neither of them responded. I have no idea what happened to the secretary or if she's even still alive today, but if she knew something about Pam's disappearance, would she really be able to remain silent for 36 years, particularly after Rob passed away? And while I don't know how old her son was back in 1989, could he potentially know something? Well, even though I'm going to refrain from speculating about the secretary's potential involvement, it's worth noting that when the Maricopa County Attorney's Office took a fresh look at the case decades later, their letter to the Frisbee family made mention of quote-unquote recent witness statements. I have no idea what new information they might have uncovered, but you have to remember that not only is there no body in this case, but there's no physical evidence of foul play or that a crime even took place. So if the Maricopa County Attorney's Office still thought they would have been able to charge and convict Rob of second-degree murder after all these years if he was still alive, that indicates to me that they must have found something pretty damning. But if Rob did have an accomplice who helped him dispose of Pam's body, and that person was still alive, I'd like to think that the authorities would have taken action and forced them to reveal the location of Pam's remains. The fact that they elected to close the investigation makes me think that Rob alone might have been the only one who knew where Pam was, but with the information we have, we can only speculate. So it's no big secret that ever since I saw this case profiled on Unsolved Mysteries all those years ago, I've always believed that Rob was responsible for Pam's disappearance. But while Rob never got to see the inside of a prison cell, dying after a long-term battle with liver and colon cancer is a pretty horrible way to go, so you could say that karma ultimately got him in the end. And it's hard to feel much sympathy once you hear that Rob did apparently have the opportunity to come clean and reveal the full truth about what happened to Pam while he was on his deathbed in hospice care, yet he still refused to do so. Over the years, I've discussed a number of suspects in these cold cases who are technically innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, but this is one suspect who may have eventually been proven guilty if he had lived long enough. However, this saga will never truly be over for Pam's family unless they can bring her home and lay her to rest. So if you happen to have any information about the disappearance of Pam Page or the possible location of her remains, please contact the Peoria Police Department Criminal Investigations Bureau at 623-773-7097. That's 623-773-7097. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened in this case, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now, the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Over the past 7 years, our Patreon page has released over 80 exclusive bonus episodes, which are all currently available in our archives for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3. This past month, I released a bonus episode about the 1980 murder of Tanya Koprick by her estranged ex-fiancé Richard Bachledge, who was profiled as a wanted fugitive on Unsolved Mysteries and has eluded the authorities for 45 years. I've also dropped an exclusive bonus episode from my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and one of my co-hosts, Jules, discuss the 1982 murder of Diane Harlan and the subsequent 1986 disappearance of her husband, Hugh Harlan. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I've recorded another new audio commentary track, which can be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and we now have nearly 80 of those commentary tracks in our archives. I'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent listeners who have signed up with us on Patreon this week, and they are Kimberly P., Shannon, Victoria S., and Amen. Thank you all so much for your support. I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, or whatever your favorite podcasting platform is. So have yourselves a great week and join us next Wednesday for another brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.